You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 18th of November 2013. Plans to bring Stalybridge Mosque rejected by council planners because of unwanted traffic. Advice on respectful treatment of Muslims arrested in Torquay. Verbal or physical attacks on armed forces personnel to be hate crimes under new proposal. Freedom of movement, Romanians humiliated by Schengen wall. Dutch national arrested in Belgium for preparing attacks. Greece, construction of Athens Mosque finally begins. Systematic abuse of migrant workers in Qatar. Thought for the day, how one condition breeds another. And finally, funny headings in papers, a Monday laugh. UK News. Plans to build Stalybridge Mosque rejected by council planners because of unwanted traffic. More than 1,500 people signed a petition against the plans to create a community centre and a place for prayer on the site of Kenworthy Street's former Pineapple Inn. Religious leaders hoping to build a mosque in Stalybridge had been turned down by council planners. Objectors claimed it would bring unwanted traffic and parked cars on an already busy road. Understanding Islam, the charity behind the application, say they are disappointed but still hopeful of finding a home in the town. World at 8 states, we don't want to understand Islam, we already do. Thus the objections. Advice on respectful treatment of Muslims arrested in Torquay. Advice has been given to Torquay police on the best way to treat Muslims held in custody. A representative from the Torbay Islamic Centre was invited to the custody unit to make sure best practice and correct standards were being met. He gave advice on a range of matters which would be important to Muslims arrested and held in the Torquay cells. It follows guidelines about best practice from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. Sergeant Howard Brugge of Torquay Custody said, "We wanted to identify how we looked after Muslim detainees and were visited by Dr Ali from the Torbay Islamic Centre. Torquay doesn't have any issues, but we wanted to make sure things were being done in a respectful way. World at 8, we should treat them the way Christians are treated in Islamic countries." Enough said. Verbal or physical attacks on armed forces personnel to be hate crimes under new proposal. Assaults on armed forces personnel would become a specific crime entailing tougher penalties for offenders under a new law to be voted on by MPs this week. Verbal or physical attacks on members of the Army, Air Force or Navy would be categorised as hate crimes under an amendment to the Criminal Justice Act 2003. The proposal by Labour MP Thomas Docherty would give troops the protection currently afforded to ethnic minorities, gay people and the disabled. An attack on a member of the armed forces or their family would be classed as an aggravated crime if a court establishes that it was motivated by the victim's association with the military. The move is backed by Shadow Defence Secretary Vernon Coker and many Conservatives. The Ministry of Defence, however, said last night that service chiefs do not want members of the armed forces to be singled out for special treatment. 1 in 5 troops has been verbally abused while in uniform and 1 in 20 has been physically abused, according to a survey commissioned last year by Tory peer Lord Ashcroft. More than 9,000 service personnel were quizzed as part of the research. World at 8. This is a first-class ruling and must be implemented in all its original forms ASAP. It is too late for many, but in time for enough. European News. Freedom of movement, Romanians humiliated by Schengen wall. Romania and Bulgaria will not enter the Schengen area on January 1, 2014, announced European Commission President José Manuel Barroso on November 11th. This amounts to proof of the lack of responsibility of European leaders, remarks Journal National. This latest declaration is a 180-degree U-turn on his affirmation in September to the effect that Romania and Bulgaria are ready to enter Schengen. Romanians have once again been made to feel like second-class citizens in a Europe which tries to convince people that this is not what it wants. World at 8, they are, especially the Romas, and should stay put forever and ever and ever. Dutch national arrested in Belgium for preparing attacks. A 23-year-old Dutch national has been arrested in Belgium because he was involved in concrete preparations for terror attacks, RTL reported on Friday. The man is said to come from the village of Klinge in the southern province of Zeeland. It was a question of days, the spokesman said. We had information that threats were very concrete. The man was working out the practicalities. Greece, construction of Athens Mosque finally begins. After nearly 13 years of delay, the Greek government announced on Thursday that the construction of the first mosque in Athens will finally begin. According to the Ministry of Infrastructure, Transport and Networks, as Greek reporter Websiter informs, a Greek consortium has been chosen. The 4 previous attempts of the state to find a company that would take on the construction project had failed. The project will have to be completed within 6 months of contracts being signed. The building of the 600 square metres will have a budget of €946,000. The mosque will be built on former military property and it won't have a minaret. The construction of the mosque was cancelled several times. It was first announced in 2000 before the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens. However, the Greek Orthodox Church was opposed to the project. Although this will be the first official mosque, there are many non-official places of worship in Athens, Greece, due to the numerous Muslim immigrants. Their constantly increasing number makes the construction of a mosque necessary. In 2011, the Greek government was forced to adopt a law that would ensure the construction of a mosque. However, the project was delayed because of concerns over the location and because of protests from right-wing extremists, such as members and supporters of Golden Dawn. The only official mosque in Greece is in Komatini, a town in East Thrace, where a minority of Muslim Turks live. World at 8. Now the Greek people have lost their only voice, the Golden Dawn. God help them. Their government won't. World news. Systematic abuse of migrant workers in Qatar. Qatar's feverish preparations for hosting the FIFA World Cup in 2022 has triggered systematic abuse of migrant workers, mostly from South and Southeast Asia, who are arriving in the wealthy Emirates in droves. The rights group Amnesty International has pencilled the spotlight on what it called was the routine abuse of migrant workers, in some cases amounting to forced labour. The hard-hitting report titled The Dark Side of Migration, Spotlight on Qatar's Construction Sector Ahead of the World Cup, has unravelled in considerable detail the various dimensions and mechanisms that are used for systematically abusing migrants, who are arriving at the rate of 20 workers per hour in the hope of benefiting from an unprecedented construction boom in the tiny Gulf Emirate. Construction companies and the Qatari authorities alike are failing migrant workers. Employers in Qatar have displayed an appalling disregard for the basic human rights of migrant workers. Many are taking advantage of a permissive environment and lax enforcement of labour protections to exploit construction workers, says Sally El-Shetty, Secretary-General of Amnesty International. The report, compiled after extensive interviews with expat workers, as well as meetings with company and government officials, points to the existence of complex contractual chains that often display inhuman disregard of workers' rights. The study quotes one manager as saying that his company was employing animals, a deeply pejorative reference to blue-collar workers that were hired by the firm. World at 8. If we Brits had referred to our foreign workers as animals, the entire country would be up in arms. But Islam sticks together as usual. They see nothing wrong with working non-Muslims like animals. It is all encouraged by their prophet. Thought for the day. How one condition breeds another. I was thinking as I watched over the weekend some episodes of World War II, the apocalypse. 2 things. Firstly, how a man so reviled, hated and yet imitated dominates daytime TV and is in fact always on it. His name, Adolf Hitler. And secondly, how all the liberal Marxist lovies driving their Volkswagens wouldn't have those cars to drive unless it was for whom? Our Adolf yet again. Volkswagen, or the people's car, was an invention of the Third Reich. Thus Wikipedia, although downplaying the role of the notorious dictator, reads: Volkswagen was originally founded in 1937 by the Nazi trade union, the German Labour Front, Deutsche Arbeitsfront. In the early 1930s, German auto industry was still largely composed of luxury models, and the average German rarely could afford anything more than a motorcycle. As a result, only 1 German out of 50 owned a car. In 1933, with many of the above projects still in development or early stages of production, Adolf Hitler got involved, demanding the production of a basic vehicle capable of transporting 2 adults and 3 children at 62 miles per hour. He wanted his German citizens to have the same access to a car as the Americans. The People's Car would be available to citizens of the Third Reich through a savings plan at 990 Reichsmarks, about the price of a small motorcycle, the average income being around 32 Reichsmarks a week. So drive easy in your fascist car, my friends, and enjoy. Whilst in a mood for thought which is rare for me over my weekends, I compare the newish World War II apocalypse with the much older and first series called World at War. Same pictures but not the same commentator or ethos. And to wit, I have never heard so many whines about racists or racism in any of the World at War programmes as I've heard in the newer version. In fact, that word didn't enter the commentator's mouth all during World at War, and of course the reason? World at War was an invention of the early 70s, and the word racist was little known and even less used. We had not entered the time of Big Brother, cameras, lack of humour, lack of soul and massive immigration, which brings its own problems of racism. The early 60s had seen the rise of Middle England, the war shortages had gone, fashion and fun were the order of the day, and we were yet to reap the whirlwind of seeing our towns and cities reduced to inner city slums and a harsh indoctrination in place which would forbid any forms of humour, self-worth, or of course that dreaded and now much used Trotskyite invention, the word racism. We were still English, still mainly white, and enjoying the final days of Rome before the Visigoths on the web took over. The commentator for the World at War was Laurence Olivier, and what a voice that man had, compared to the whinging liberal spoutings at issue from the new series, which of course centres on the Holocaust in all its terrible details, never to be forgotten but oft repeated, to different ethnicities and in different countries. This series put everything that occurred during World War II as being owed to racism, from the war in the Pacific and the US and Japanese troops to the racist ethos of the Third Reich in Europe. One point is not made clear, that the R word, although invented in 1933, was rarely used outside Marxist circles and not very well used in those. Europe had little use for that word in those days, why should it? It was only applied to the Jewish populations in the latter half of the war in Europe, and to be fair, Europeans have always had a word for the gypsy populations in Europe, and most of them were probably unprintable. One of the episodes of World War II, the Apocalypse, concerned the African-manned Italian units taken prisoner in Europe by the Germans, and the term German racist ideology was applied to disgusting footage of several of these people tearing a live goat to pieces and eating them, which apparently isn't abhorrent to Marxists, but it is to fascists, because of the right racist ideology that fuelled the soldiers of the Third Reich. Frankly, I'd have killed these men on the spot, but not because of any racist ideology, but for cruelty to animals and appearing with filed down teeth for the cameras. Anyone with any standards at all would have been horrified by a band of leaping, jeering and laughing blacks waving bits of raw goat and totally unaware they were prisoners of war, let alone human. Let me tell you, one didn't have to be of the German master race to see that. In short, this word racism was invented well before its time and has been used in overkill when its time took place, roughly since the northern states of the US had its input of Jewish communist persona who used that word non-stop, and like all bad germs it has spread to us in Europe during the late 60s and early 70s. But I personally, living down south, never heard that word until the 80s. So the Germans only used that word with reference to the new race laws pertaining to peoples of Jewish origin, and it was not racism that fired up World War II, it was Lebensraum, or living space, that Hitler craved. Lebensraum, German for habitat or literally life room, was an important component of Nazi ideology in Germany. The Nazis supported territorial expansionism to gain Lebensraum, Lebensspace, as being a law of nature for all healthy and vigorous peoples of superior races to displace people of inferior races, especially if the people of a superior race were facing overpopulation in their given territories. The German Nazi Party claimed that Germany inevitably needed to be territorially expanded because it was facing an overpopulation crisis within its Treaty of Versailles design boundaries that Adolf Hitler described. We are overpopulated and cannot feed ourselves from our own resources. Thus, expansion was justified as an inevitable necessity for Germany to pursue in order to end the country's overpopulation within existing confined territory and provide resources necessary to its people's well-being. The idea of a Germanic people without sufficient space dates back to long before Adolf Hitler brought it to prominence. Rather like the misinformation about the American Civil War. According to schools and kids today, even if they learn about it, they probably do with the help of diversity school teachers who link it with slavery and the reason thereof. Of course it wasn't. The plight of black slaves was not in the forefront of the reason for the Civil War. It was the basic reason for all wars: money, politics, and in the case of the southern states, cotton, their main export. Like the Jewish problem, everyone knew black slaves existed, but like the beleaguered Jews in Europe, no one wanted them and no one wanted to even know about them until the end of those wars was in sight and the winning side wanted a reason to really put the boot in and of course rewrote history along the way when they won. That is, to encompass a good reason to kill your own tribes, for example, to save another tribe or peoples. All absolute bunkum. America, the UK and Europe all rejected the displaced Jews for years after the war had ended, and most of the southern blacks in the US ended up in the northern states working just as hard as they did under slavery and were for the most part not looked after at all. But racism hasn't been a stumbling block for practically anything until the last 3 decades, and now it dominates everything. And why? Because it is now racist to question anything that might encompass another colour, ethnicity or religion in the UK and indeed in Europe. Look at the fuss and bother about the Dutch Christmas festival, Sinterklaas and his little black helpers. Zwarte Piet, Black Pete, is the companion of St Nicholas, Sinterloos, from which the American term Santa Claus is derived, in the folklore of the Low Countries. Like Santa Claus, Zwarte Piet is a hybrid stock character of pagan origin. In its modern form, the character is commonly depicted as a blackamoor with black face makeup and dressed in stylised colourful Moorish attire, akin to mores in European heraldry, and similar to Moorish characters in the Moors and Christians' Iberian folk festivals commemorating the Reconquista. In the early legends, Sinterklaas was either accompanied by a demonic servant that is cuffed in chains or by a Moorish partner responsible for the organisation of the gifts. Until the second half of the 20th century, St Nicholas' helper was not too bright, in line with old colonial traditions. Once immigration started from the former colonised countries, Zwarte Piet became a much more respected assistant of St Nicholas, attentive but playful. Most of the Zwarte Piet also gained significant skill in acrobatics. And yet we now have the black populations of Holland setting up marches and protests because, yes, you guessed it, they liken the figures of these pre-demons to black slaves and that old bugbear, slavery. When in fact they've become darker over the years as these helpers came down the chimneys and get soot all over them. It's nothing to do with slavery. Well, it has evolved rather like the black and white minstrels. But I would have thought that any representation in a country not famed for its large amount of Africans or similarly ethnic peoples would be welcome, but it isn't. What they don't realise is that these little helpers evolved from demons, and some of the references to Black Peter is from the Moorish influence in Europe. Moors or Spanish persons of Moorish or Arab descent and colouring are the basis of the Black Dutch and Black Irish namings in those countries. Anyone with dark colouring, not necessarily coal black, were thought to have this blood running through them. My husband having Black Dutch in his family. It isn't an insult at all. I would have thought these black people, whose ancestors probably never even saw the inside of a slave ship, would be happy to be represented as happy figures who give gifts to children, rather than a bloodthirsty lot of bongos waving machetes, which might be nearer the truth. So what would the Germans and indeed Europe have done in the 1930s if the levels of immigration into those countries had reached the stage they have now, or indeed there had been an official push for massive immigration from the Third World into, say, the Sudetenland, France or Great Britain as it was then, in the 1920s? Would racism have reared its head then in all its biased glory under another title? Because there was little or no formal immigration under the Weimar Republic and communism was not popular in free Europe. The main adversaries the German had were the Jewish communists, so does the term racist apply to the people who invented it? Or does genocide and outbreeding encompass it as well? When do actions overtake this much used word which allows all that and more to occur within the country selected? You tell me. And finally, funny headings and a Monday laugh. I was sent some very odd headings in various newspapers from the UK and abroad, and I'm sharing these with you. Diana was still alive hours before she died. Lady Jack's off to hot start in conference. Bugs flying around with wings are flying bugs. Republicans turned off by the size of Obama's package. Girls' schools still offering something special, head. Statistics show that teen pregnancy drops off significantly after the age of 25. Federal agents raid gun shop and find weapons. Marijuana issue sent to a joint committee. Homicide victims rarely talk to police. 17 remain dead in morgue shooting spree. Workers suffered leg pain after crane drops 800 ball on his head. City unsure why the sewer smells. Study shows frequent sex enhances pregnancy chances. Meeting in open meetings is closed. Man accused of killing lawyer receives a new attorney. Hospitals resort to hiring doctors. New sick policy requires 2-day notice. Man with 8 DUIs blames drinking problem. Parents keep kids home to protest school closure. Starvation can lead to health hazards. The Brass celebrates a pair of historic milestones this year. Total lunar eclipse will be broadcast live on Northwood's public radio. Rangers get whiff of colon. And miracle cure kills 5th patient. And if you thought the papers were reliable sources of information, I think again. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.